Welcome to Beyond the Veil Australia, where history, mystery, and the unexplained collide. From eerie encounters to cryptid lore, from channeled messages to scientific investigations, we're lifting the veil and stepping into the unknown. I'm Heather, your guide through the shadows, and together we'll unravel paranormal phenomena, strange synchronicities, and the mysteries that refuse to be ignored. Whether you're a skeptic, a seeker, or somewhere in between, this space is for you. Fasten your seatbelt, expand your thinking, and cross the threshold beyond the veil. We've watched the narrative shift, UFO to UAP, dismiss reports to declassified files, secrecy to half-truths. But do we really understand what's happening? For years we've debated what these subjects are. Are they extraterrestrial visitors, secret military projects, or misidentified natural phenomena? And yet, amongst all of this, a message surfaced, one that suggests the truth isn't just about us, it's about them. If UFOs are just observers, why do they interfere? Why send warnings? Do they step in? In today's episode and the final part to UFOs and UAPs in the You've Got to Be Joking series, we move beyond the cover-ups and leaks to explore the warnings, evolution, and interstellar connection behind UFO phenomena. Has humanity begun to be guided all along? Or are we on the part of something far more intertwined than we ever imagined? Interstellar warnings. Why they interfere. If UFOs are just observers, why do they interfere with nuclear facilities? For decades, reports have surfaced of unidentified aerial craft appearing near nuclear missile sites, sometimes moments before system failures. These incidences aren't isolated and they span continents, military bases, and decades of secrecy. So, are these encounters warnings, interventions, or something else entirely? Let's start with one of the most compelling military encounters, the 1967 Malmstrom Air Force Base incident. On March 16, 1967, missile officers at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana were stationed in their underground launch control centres, monitoring 10 nuclear missiles. Suddenly, warning lights blinked on. Each missile system was disabled simultaneously. At the same time, security personnel above ground reported seeing a glowing red object hovering near the facility's gate. The object remained silent, unmoving, while the missile systems remained offline. Within minutes, the base had lost control of its entire nuclear arsenal. Former USAF Captain Robert Salas, who was stationed at Malmstrom, later testified that the incident was not an isolated event. A similar shutdown had occurred just days earlier but at another launch site. Salas recalled receiving a frantic call from security personnel warning that a bright red, glowing object was hovering over the base. Moments later, the missile systems went offline with no clear explanation. Engineers later confirmed that the missile guidance systems had been disrupted, but no mechanical failures were found. Salas has since spoken publicly about the event, stating that he believes the UFO presence was deliberate, a warning rather than an attack. Then there are the declassified Soviet-era reports, revealing eerily similar encounters. During the Cold War, Soviet military officials documented multiple instances of UFO interference near nuclear missile sites. In one case, a glowing object was seen hovering over a Soviet missile base, moments before launch systems failed. Some reports suggest that missiles were temporarily activated, as if someone or something was testing and taking control over them. One of the most chilling accounts comes from former Soviet officers who testified that in 1982, a UFO briefly took control of a nuclear missile system at the base in Ukraine. The missiles were placed into launch mode, but the sequence was abruptly halted before activation. Soviet intelligence officials later investigated the incident, but no explanation was ever provided. Some believe that the event was an extraterrestrial intervention, preventing an accidental launch. And then there are the eyewitness military accounts. Testimonies from officers who witnessed UFOs hovering over classified nuclear bases moments before missile system failures. Former USAF officers have testified that these incidences were not random, but a part of a pattern, as if to be a deliberate interference with nuclear capabilities. In 1964, a saucer-shaped object was allegedly filmed firing beams of light at a test missile during a launch sequence. The missile tumbled out of the sky, leading some to believe the object had disabled its guidance system. In 1975, multiple UFOs were reported hovering over nuclear bases in the US, triggering security alerts and temporary shutdowns of missile systems. So, are these encounters warnings, interventions, or something else entirely? Wow. Those encounters and those stories are really, really fascinating. It's interesting that these particular experiences are happening during a heightened time with the Cold War. And it's really interesting to sort of think about, that it wasn't just an isolated event at one place. It's happened in multiple places around the world, all within the same sort of time frame. And, I part of me wonders at the time, we look at, say, Roswell, for example, being that it was sort of at a time where we'd just come out of World War II and we were entering this kind of awkward sort of space of different countries maybe having some growing tensions and kind of wanting to be able to be seen as the world leader in military technology and so on, that, were these incidences that happened not just with the nuclear bases but also with sightings. Was there maybe a fear around these objects being like spies from the opposition, right? Like, are they trying to test the most advanced military technology of that time, and are they concerned that these objects that are coming through are actually the enemy trying to disable their defense systems? It's really interesting because we come out of World War II and everyone's just kind of like, whoa, what the fuck just happened? And they're trying to kind of, I don't know, maybe rebuild and readjust to a world that looks very different to what it did pre-World War II. And suddenly we've got advancements in military defense technology that, for the time, I think was, well, we've got these defense systems and this is how we're going to protect ourselves, but we can't be sure of this guy over here because we don't know what they're up to. They were, you know, they were in the war and it was really hard to articulate whose side they were on. And, like, is there this growing tension of maybe different perceptions of, of one another following the war? And I mean, you can sort of understand to a degree because that, World War II was quite horrendous. Not saying that any other wars weren't, of course they were, but, it's really highlighted this sense of different countries around the world that kind of want to assert their authority in the world. And that was a very clear example of certain countries in Europe at the time. Um, yeah, it's quite interesting to see that they were happening in multiple parts of the world. And what was interesting was that the two stories that we touched on were between two countries that were really vying for that lead position of being very advanced in their defense strategies. So, I can sort of see on both sides that maybe there was more sightings in those places because they were utilizing those advancements for the time, and there was this threat that if we piss off this country, they could do this. And, maybe there's that thought with when we see these objects, maybe it's the opposition coming in to spy on us and check out what we've got. Um, yeah, it's quite fascinating, really. Yeah, it's kind of cool, but it's really eerie at the same time. And this is sort of where we're moving into this next part of episode 3, is that we're kind of really delving into, the different forms of contact and um, different forms of connection, and when we're seeing a spike in sightings, is it around, times of tension and things like that, which, through all of the research that I've looked at, that I've also, with documentaries that I've watched and different things, is that the one of the common themes is that there's certain points in history where we seem to have a spike in when this phenomena occurs, and it's usually around tensions within different governments around the world, and that sense of security, I suppose. So kind of interesting that we're sort of picking that up, and it's a correlation that, you sort of have to watch a lot of stuff and listen to a lot of stuff and read a lot of stuff to really start to feel like you're putting some of the puzzle pieces together. And moving into this next section, we're going to be integrating a part of that channeled message again, which is sort of also helping put the puzzle pieces together with what we've discussed in part 1 and part 2, but also with where we're going in part 3. So I'm excited to share this with you again because, this channeled message that was in part 2 and is also being incorporated into this part was a result of an automatic writing session or communication that I undertook. So, that was like an A4 page of writing. So, the different topics that we've covered, I've been able to really incorporate different parts of that message into each topic where it fits, because when I look at some of these messages that come through, it can take a couple of days for it to really settle in, for me to be able to kind of comprehend what the message was. So it was really interesting being able to look back on what was included in this message and what topics we were covering in this part 3 series, and where things fit. So I'm kind of excited to share this next part of it with you as well. So following on from the interference with the systems, we're going to move into the next part, which is the channel message about it being, was it a warning about war and planetary survival? As my automatic writing session unfolded, something confronting and eerie emerged. A moment where everything I had read, watched, or heard suddenly aligned. It felt like a truth surfacing, piece by piece, demanding to be acknowledged. Your people are on the brink of a war, a conflict built upon weapons of catastrophic destruction, destined to bring mass extinction for all who inhabit your planet. We have scouts on your planet to ensure that this never happens. We interfere with nuclear weapons because they are dangerous, not just to humans, but to the delicate balance of survival across many worlds. This message was clear, direct, intentional, a warning that humanity's fate is interwoven with forces beyond our understanding. If these beings intervene, it is not just about protecting Earth. It is about preserving a balance that stretches beyond this planet and beyond this galaxy. Was this a warning, a plea, or something even more profound? What do you make of this message? Whoa. Yeah, that one was an interesting message to have come through. It was, as I kind of stated, it was like, I don't know, things were just starting to, it was like putting a puzzle together. It's like you start to see different elements of the puzzle emerging, and you can kind of see where they're coming together, and some of the things that I've learnt along, doing this podcast, but also, even through my research of just wanting to know about this even prior to this was, lots of different pieces of information that I've come across have suddenly started making sense. And I feel like that channeled message really, it really highlighted that for me. And it's a really kind of odd feeling. It's sort of eerie, but it's kind of cool. Like there's been some form of confirmation that, we are coming close to a disclosure, and we are starting to understand more about what these beings are, what their connection is with Earth. Is it about protecting humanity? Because if they don't intervene, it's not just affecting us, it's affecting so much more. So yeah, I found that really cool. And, I did have to, once I'd shared that message with you, I just sort of needed to give myself a little bit of a minute to just kind of like come back to the room, because it's interesting when I do have channeling, whether it be through having moments of just, seeing and hearing things, or when I'm channeling through automatic writing, it's quite, I don't know, draining's not quite the right word, but it really pulls a lot of energy out of you to be able to engage in that. And, sometimes when I'm able to then kind of relay the message, it can also be a little bit almost like reliving that, in a sense. Like you're kind of like, oh my God, it's like you're saying those words, but you're also kind of remembering that moment of channeling and kind of being like, holy shit, like this is a lot to take in right now. And yeah, so I was like, I just need to give myself a hot minute to kind of come back to the room and just like shake it off a little bit. But, one thing I've noticed with my channeling, and even when I do different things with my tarot, when I'm doing readings and things like that, it's really cool to be able to connect. And it's like my higher self can connect and has this easy flow of conversation, but it's getting the higher self to connect it back into the human experience. And sometimes I have to kind of put out there to my spirit team that it's like, guys, I know I'm kind of getting this, but I need you to just slow it down a bit, because you've got to remember that the questions that I'm asking, or that the communication I'm having with you, is still done in a human experience with a human brain. So it's a lot slower than the higher self and you guys having a chit chat. I kind of need you to just ease off a little bit and just give me a minute to catch up, because sometimes you're kind of like, well, slow down, I can't keep up. And one thing that I notice when I do have automatic writing is that it's like that higher self is channeling and it's all kind of coming through, but it's like the brain and the hand are much slower than that message. So sometimes, when I'm writing, I can feel when they're coming through my hand and writing, but sometimes I can feel where it's like the message gets a bit lost because they're trying to say things too fast, that my body is like, well, okay, I've hit my threshold, I can't keep up. And we end up with a bit of a weird squiggle or a strange line or something. And, it takes a couple of days to kind of be like, the fuck does that actually say? Because I have to remind, spirit or being or whoever's communicating with me that I am still in a human body and I still need this to just be slowed down to a human pace, because I'm not quite on the same plane as you, like the whole of me, just part of me is. So just time out, slow down, let me catch up. So yeah, it's interesting even just being able to kind of share that again and kind of going, oh, okay, I just need a minute before we kind of move into the next one. But yeah, interesting kind of message that came through, and it's really funny how it's sort of intertwining into, why we get a spike of sightings around nuclear missile facilities, and at certain points in time where there was growing tensions and there was a higher demand of the human population to be really getting in there with these. So yeah, a little bit spooky, but a bit cool at the same time. But we are now going to kind of move into the evolution of UFO contact, and what that sort of looks like. So we're kind of going to do a bit of a touchback on different forms of contact. I am mindful that this particular area can be slightly difficult to navigate, because I think there's lots of forms of contact that were very prominent in a certain period of time, and where that contact may have reduced slightly and it's evolved into a different form, which kind of touches on what we discussed in part 2 about what we're seeing, and what sightings were at one point in time and what they are more now in today's day and age. So we're going to jump into this one. But in the early days, reports suggested UFOs had occupants, humanoid beings, light entities, direct interaction. But today, sightings look different. So, what changed? Why do encounters shift from more of that face-to-face interaction to more distant observations? And if UFOs once had pilots, why do they now behave like autonomous drones? Let's start with the historical reports. The encounters where witnesses described occupants, light beings, and humanoid figures. In 1947, pilot Kenneth Arnold reported seeing 9 high-speed objects near Mount Rainier, describing them as saucer-like, a term that would define UFO lore for decades. But early reports didn't just describe flying objects. They described beings inside them. Take the 1954 wave of humanoid encounters in France. hundreds of reports surfaced describing small humanoid figures, often wearing metallic suits, emerging from landed craft. Witnesses described telepathic communication, strange gestures, and brief interactions before the beings returned to their ships and vanished. Then there's the 1967 Idaho Falls sighting, where witnesses described a circular craft with a transparent dome, and inside were two humanoid figures, and they were visible. Similar reports emerged throughout the 1960s and 1970s, suggesting that UFO occupants were not just observing, but also interacting. But modern sightings seem to tell a different story. Today's aerial craft display AI-like intelligence, autonomous maneuvers, and appear to have non-human or humanoid operation. In recent military encounters, pilots describe craft that accelerate instantaneously, perform precise formation adjustments, and move in ways that suggest advanced drone technology rather than piloted vehicles. And we're going to kind of come back again to some of the types of craft that we discussed in part 2, but we're going to take the Tic Tac UFO incident of 2004, where Navy pilots witnessed an object moving with no visible propulsion, descending 80,000 feet in less than a second, and actively jamming radar systems. And it was an act that was considered hostile. Or we've even got the gimbal and go fast videos, officially declassified by the US Navy, showing objects accelerating at speeds beyond known aircraft capabilities. These encounters weren't just sightings, they were documented, recorded, and analysed. And yet, as we touched on part 2, there's no official stance and it remains vague. So, some researchers believe that modern UFOs are no longer piloted. Instead, they function as autonomous drones, capable of self-learning, adapting, and executing missions without direct control. A rise of AI-driven aerial surveillance has led some to speculate that extraterrestrial civilizations may have shifted to drone technology for efficiency, safety, and secrecy. And so what's interesting with that is I know some of these areas about whether it was piloted or non-piloted were covered in part 2, but this kind of sets into maybe some of the sightings that we've noticed in terms of what the contact type has been. And interestingly, I've been watching a series called Fright Club. Now, some of you may be familiar with this. It has the Ghost Brothers and Jack Osborne, and essentially it's very similar to the Osbournes Want to Believe. However, they're all paranormal investigators. And what they do is they have viewers submit paranormal clips that they then will play for each other to try and basically scare the shit out of each other, is kind of how it works, hence the word Fright Club. And interestingly, there was one clip that was shown in an episode that I watched maybe in the last couple of days. And it was off the coast of California. Now, I am also mindful that we have Catalina Island in that vicinity, which is, I'm pretty certain from my recollection, is it's the like top UFO and USO like hotspot of the world. So it's kind of interesting that this particular sighting happened there or somewhere within that region. And this gentleman had started talking about the fact that there's a type of phenomena called UFO calling. And essentially what he does is that it's sort of through the use of telepathic communication, and you essentially will kind of put your intention through your higher self that you are wanting to make contact with an advanced civilization, or whatever you want to call it. And basically what he did is he'd submitted a clip of a really interesting phenomena, and it was like a bright green light, and he captured it on footage, and it looked, when you sort of zoomed in, it looked like one, but then suddenly it was like 5 green lights. And I mean, I'm not sure if people have watched things from, like maybe around the 80s. I'm sort of going with the ET vibe here. But the way they made lights move up and down on the craft, it was a deliberate kind of beam in these lights. And that was sort of what this particular sighting had, that was what was captured, was that there were lights that were doing this weird, like, up and down movement, very similar to something that we would have seen in an 80s film. And they were bright green. And he said that what he does is he will put like a telepathic call out to make contact, and then he will wait, and then when he sees something, he will then record it and capture it to kind of be like, I've made contact, to call out for, communication sort of thing. And it was really interesting to kind of hear that maybe even now, as we're sort of moving into the, more, I suppose, more modern times, but, that it's not just people that are experiencing abduction, it's people that are also experiencing this telepathic communication and being able to communicate through, obviously through their higher self, or through, it's another one that I've seen sort of happen around the Uinta Basin with different investigators that have gone out, where they have like the laser pointers, and they point them up, and they'll do like a certain amount of contact points or something, and then they watch and see, and if there's an object or a light in the sky that then repeats that same thing, it's kind of that direct line of communication. So it's quite interesting to kind of come across that side of it. Yeah, so I mean, I'm kind of blown away, because it's just, the more I think about it, the more we've sort of, not to say that these abduction experiences don't happen, because I have watched a lot of recent docuseries about people that have had abduction experiences, and they've, that some people have experienced them for a certain period of time, and then they stop, and then others have sort of continued to experience them throughout their life, and it still continues. So it's interesting that we've got different forms of communication there, through more of that moving, that evolution of it being more to do with telepathic or with signaling, but we're still having some of the original kind of experiences, which kind of leads me into our next segment, which is about the genetic connection, and are we more than just observers? So this one sort of now just piggybacking off what we were just talking about with the different experiences. So I'm really looking forward to delving into this, because it's an area of the phenomena across the whole lot that's really, really been something that's at the forefront of my mind. And there is an element of maybe personal experience or connection that we will get into, but I'm curious to kind of really go into this as, a little bit, again, where we're just scratching the surface in this 3-part series. So, it's sort of good to be able to get into that a little bit more and share that with all of you. So we're now moving into the segment of the genetic connection. If they are distant, why do they still care? Why interfere? Why send messages? For decades, UFO sightings have been dismissed as mere observations, silent watchers in the sky. But what if they're not just watching? What if they're protecting something? Something connected to us. A genetic mystery. Then there's another genetic anomaly. One that isn't just confined to cryptids and mysterious beings, but to us. Rhesus negative blood has puzzled scientists for decades. Unlike rhesus positive individuals, rhesus negative people lack the rhesus monkey gene, a curious absence that raises questions about human ancestry. Some researchers propose that rhesus negative blood emerged as a rare genetic mutation, while others suggest a deeper, more mysterious origin. Could rhesus negative individuals be the descendant of ancient intervention? Some theorists argue that this blood type is linked to extraterrestrial influence, an evolutionary anomaly that sets certain individuals apart in ways we have yet to understand. Rhesus negative individuals display unique physiological traits, heightened intelligence, or even a predisposition for unexplained phenomena. Could this rare bloodline be evidence of a lost genetic heritage, or one that stretches beyond Earth? So this one's really kind of fascinating for me. I remember watching something, it must have been like a snippet of a documentary of something to do with rhesus negative blood. And it was really interesting because there was this argument that, despite lots of research and studies, these particular scientists couldn't actually trace the true origin for the rhesus factor and where the negative comes from. And interestingly, um, some science that we've got currently says that it's a mutation that comes from the rhesus monkey, hence why we call it the rhesus factor. Now, to give a little bit of context, my mum is a nurse. Her parents were both in the medical profession. Her mum's side and her siblings were all nurses. And my mum's dad was a doctor and his brother was a doctor, and it just kept on going. So sadly, I know more about nursing stuff than I care to admit because I'm definitely not in that field. And I take my hat off to my mum and my sister who's also in nursing. You guys, good on you. You're amazing. But I just couldn't do it. It's just not me. But one thing I remember learning when I was, I was probably studying biology at school, and there must have been something to do with like genetics and mutations and what have you. And I remember asking my mum about blood types, and she's like, look, it's a really complex thing to unpack, but we'll try and keep it as like simplistic as possible in the way that it was sort of explained to me. Was that we obviously all know that we've got different blood groups, meaning O, A, AB, and B. So they're our blood groups. And then we have what's called the rhesus factor. So you are either rhesus positive or you are rhesus negative. So you could be, for instance, I'm in an A blood group and I have a positive rhesus factor. So I'm an A positive. And then someone else could be an A negative or an AB negative, so on and so forth. So that's kind of like the most simplistic breakdown of the blood groups, and then you have your rhesus factor. Now, kind of just stepping back from that, I remember coming across this particular little short snippet of something about where we've got to trace the origins to. And at another point in time, I'd watched another series about encounters and the people that had had abduction experiences. And what was interesting in that particular series was that the people that had experiences, most, if not all of them, had a rhesus negative blood type. Interesting food for thought there. And then I'd seen another, I believe it was a podcast that they obviously had the video and the audio, so I was watching it on YouTube. And this particular guest that was on this podcast, I cannot for the life of me remember the name of this podcast, and I'm really annoyed that I can't because it was so intriguing. But this guest had sort of mentioned something about particular lines of heritage and connections to I don't know what they call them, like not magic, but like I'm gonna sort of say like connections to the spiritual world might be the easiest way to kind of word that, because it was, trying to word it's a bit confusing. But she said, people that have a line of rhesus negative blood will generally have come from a lineage of like spiritual realm connection with, I suppose both sides of the spiritual realm, not just sticking to one, kind of all. And then she mentioned, now I cannot for the life of me remember how to pronounce this, but I think it's like it's to do with your eye color. So if you have green or hazel eyes, or you have a particular type of formation in the color of your eyes, I know what it is because I've got it, but I can't remember how to pronounce it. So we won't try. But if you have like hazel or green eyes, or this particular type of eye design, you also are likely to have come from a lineage of like psychic or mediumship ability. And majority of the time it's in your maternal line, was what she was also saying. And it was interesting because I have hazel eyes with this, whatever condition it was called, which is where when I was little, my mum and dad used to say I had one of each in my eye color. I had like a more browny kind of color and a more bluey greeny kind of color. But as I've kind of gotten older, they've sort of become more just that hazily greeny color. So interesting. And my mum has hazel eyes, and my mum is also a negative blood group. Now, what's interesting about that is the best way to kind of put this is that a negative and a positive blood factor will almost always, in fact, always reflect a rhesus positive offspring. So my mum is a negative, my dad is a positive. Ergo, I'm a positive. But to get a negative, you have to have two negatives. So my mum is a true negative because she's a negative blood type. Her mother's side was negative, her father's side was negative, hence why she's negative. So I found it really interesting when I'd come across this particular information, because I was like, oh, shit. Maybe that explains some of the abilities that I have that I'm a little bit not scared of, but just like people are going to think I'm nuts. It sort of explains that, weirdly enough. And there's the other side of that where we look at one of these parts that we were just talking about, where some researchers believe that the rhesus factor has come from extraterrestrial origin. And my mum and I will joke about it occasionally. And I think it's funny because she is a nurse and she's like, well, it's come from the rhesus monkey. That's what's blah, blah, blah. And I sort of giggle and I'm like, Mum, you've got to take your nurse cap off for the moment. We're not talking about that. You're an alien. Um, and she'll laugh and she'll be like, well, if I'm an alien, what does that make you? And I'm like, a hybrid. And she laughs. She finds that funny. We both thought that was really funny. So, we kind of make jokes about that we're aliens or I'm a hybrid or whatever. But um, I think that's just one of those things where it's such a fascinating topic. And because you sort of have that kind of connection to it on a biological level, you're almost kind of like, oh, if this is true, like, what does that mean? It then poses the next question of like, so how do I find out more? Because I've got this personal connection with it. So, yeah, really fun fact. You've learned a little bit about blood groups and blood types from someone who's not a nurse, who has nurses and doctors in the heritage somewhere. Um, I have no idea what I'm talking about, but I'm just telling you what was told to me. And, one of the interesting things was that through people that have had abduction experiences is what was discovered through a particular line of research was that almost all of them had a negative bloodline. So it then poses that question of, with some of the experiences that we hear about from people that have been that have experienced this, we'll kind of talk about, it's like not in all instances, but in some, you know, when they're experiencing this, it's like they feel like they're a lab rat, or others have had what they can comprehend as being a biological parent of a hybrid being, and things like that. So, is it that maybe we have got this rhesus factor coming through as an extraterrestrial origin that then supports what these people that have experienced abduction are explaining in what their experience has been? And if they've got that negative factor blood, is it that they're tracking um, they're tracking how humans evolve with this blood type, and how they can continue to create a hybrid species with parents, because naturally they'd have to be, compatible blood types to be able to have an offspring. Does that make sense? Like, that's like the most simplistic version of it. I know that there'll be a lot of medical people that'll be listening and being like, yeah, like there's 5 billion other things that go into this. I know, but I'm trying to keep it as simple as simple as simple, because we could go on for 5 hours about it. So, yeah, interesting food for thought there. But as we sort of move a little bit into the next part of this, which is like more biological, and kind of talks a little bit about what we were just talking about. It's sort of about that, what makes the rhesus negative blood different, and the biological connections. So I'm really excited to jump into this one. Beyond speculation, rhesus negative blood carries distinct biological traits that set it apart from the majority of the population. The rhesus factor is a protein found on red blood cells, playing a crucial role in blood classification. Those who have this protein are rhesus positive, while those without it are rhesus negative. This is a trait that is determined by the RHD gene, which encodes the RHD protein. Approximately 15% of individuals of European descent lack the rhesus factor, while the prevalence is lower in African and Asian populations. Some researchers suggest this distribution may be linked to ancient migration patterns or environmental adaptations. Beyond its rarity, rhesus negative blood has unique medical implications. Rhesus negative individuals may have different immune responses and are at risk for hemolytic disease of the newborn if carrying a a rhesus positive fetus. This condition occurs when maternal antibodies attack the fetal red blood cells, requiring medical intervention. So this is something that my mum would have experienced, is that her body, while she was pregnant with me and with my sister, would have been like, ew, be gone, demon. So yeah, mum's body would have tried to basically say, be gone, demon, get out, you don't belong here, because I was a rhesus positive fetus. So interesting with that is that I know my mum had said, when she was experiencing pregnancy, that she would have to have an anti-D injection, which I can't remember what that stands for. I would have to ask her, and I can't remember. But basically, she would have to have an injection to tell her body not to kill me. Really, like, a bit morbid there, but that's probably the easiest way to say it, is that, yeah, her antibodies and her blood cells were like, no, you don't belong here, get out. So that there was medical intervention to kind of go, yeah, no, it's meant to be there, you just need to calm your tits, So interesting, really interesting. Just wanted to sort of throw that in there just to give a more, like a better example than just reading it and saying, this is what happens when what happens. Some studies suggest that rhesus negative individuals may have a predisposition to certain autoimmune diseases, including rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, and multiple sclerosis. While the exact mechanisms remain unclear, genetic factors linked to the rhesus factor may influence immune responses. Could these biological differences hint at something more? Some researchers propose that rhesus-negative blood may have conferred resistance to certain pathogens or environmental conditions in ancient populations. Others speculate that its rarity and unique traits could be remnants of evolutionary divergence, one that science has yet to fully unravel. And the question of human evolution. Are we more than earthly beings? There's the question of human evolution itself. Some researchers propose that our rapid cognitive development, our unexplained genetic leaps, and our deep fascination with the stars could be signs of extraterrestrial influence. In mainstream anthropology, human evolution is explained through natural selection, genetic mutations, and environmental adaptation. But some researchers argue that certain leaps in human intelligence, such as the sudden emergence of complex language, abstract thought, and advanced tool-making, may indicate external intervention. One theory suggests that early hominins may have been genetically altered, either through direct manipulation or natural hybridization with unknown species. Could our ancestors have been visited, guided, or even seeded by an advanced civilization? Some scientists propose that humanity's cognitive evolution was accelerated by unknown forces. The sudden development of symbolic thought, advanced problem solving, and abstract reasoning remains one of the greatest mysteries of anthropology. Could extraterrestrial civilizations have played a role in shaping our intelligence? Some researchers suggest that early hominins may have encountered beings with advanced knowledge, either through direct contact or genetic influence. This theory aligns with ancient myths and legends that describe gods or celestial beings imparting wisdom to early humans. Others propose humanity's fascination with the stars is more than curiosity. It's a subconscious recognition of something deeper. could our longing to explore space be an echo of ancestral memory, a call to return to where we once belonged? If extraterrestrial civilizations have been watching, guiding, or even influencing human evolution, what does that mean for our place in the universe? Are we simply observers, or are we part of something much bigger? So that's a really interesting breakdown of the evolution, I suppose, side of it. And, one thing that really touch base with me is we just covered it where it was talking about, through ancient civilizations having experiences of gods or celestial beings coming down and imparting wisdom to early humans. And we kind of covered that a little bit in part one, where we kind of looked at the ancient experiences or sightings that were recorded of visitation. So, it is interesting that, there is this side where it's sort of like, well, we've got these visitations or communications with what could only be really described or comprehended at the time of being gods or celestial beings that are in myths and legends that are providing the knowledge and the guidance. And, I think that it's interesting that even like in the evolution and the genetic connection there is that, well, these are the sightings and the experiences that have happened in ancient civilizations, but was it more than just that? Was it that there were biological links, and it's part of the responsibility of these celestial beings to come back and impart knowledge and wisdom for where the development of humanity was at the time or is still currently progressing through. So, really interesting food for thought there. I feel like, having delved into this across three parts, we have only really scratched the surface, and I feel like I have more questions than answers with where we've kind of explored things at this point in time. And I really think that, that there are a couple of other topics that will probably also kind of tie back to our three parts of UFO and UAP phenomena. That there seems to be a very common theme, and this is something that I think I've picked up on a spiritual level, but also through some of the research that I've done across different topics, is how interconnected everything actually is. I feel like, particularly with this episode where we've talked about that genetic connection and the human evolution, is it possible that, um, if we look back at cryptids, is there a connection between, say a Bigfoot or a Yowie in Australia? Is there something that's kind of connected between us and them that's also connected between us and the celestial beings? Is there some kind of connection between all of it? It's We could really just go further down this rabbit hole, and I think I'd really love to hear what you guys think about this three-part episode series of You've Got to Be Joking within Beyond the Veil. But, is there anything that we've covered off in these three episodes that you'd really like to kind of explore more? Whether it's a historical sighting that we investigate further, or if it is something to do with the genetic connection, or it could be anything. We could really delve into that a bit further, and I think that might be something that we look at further down the line. But I'd really like to get your feedback and your interest on what you'd like to learn more about under this particular umbrella. But yeah, I just want to say that this first three episodes that have been one of the biggest and most controversial topics, to be able to kind of delve into a little bit and explore a bit more, has been a really fun and positive experience for me. There's been a lot that surprised me about it. I really didn't think that I would experience any kind of channeled messages or anything like that. So to have that kind of experience happen along the way, especially in the very beginning of Beyond the Veil Australia podcast, it's quite a journey so far. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to sort of continuing on and seeing how this evolves with obviously topics and discussions with people and interviews with people and being able to share people's stories and things like that. So yeah, I just want to say a big thank you to everybody that's listened to the first 3 episodes so far, and I hope that you've enjoyed it. And yeah, I can't wait to keep going for more because it's really been a really fun experience. So with that, that is a wrap for this episode and for the 3-part series of You've Got to Be Joking. And, you know, it's a wrap for our deep dive into the biggest UFO mysteries, disclosures, and hidden truths. Yeah, across 3 episodes, we've unpacked government rebranding, military encounters, whistleblower testimonies, interstellar warnings, and the deepest connections between humanity and the unknown. But again, we've only just scratched the surface, and the phenomena is far bigger than any single revelation, deeper than any leaked document, and far more complex than any official report. But as I said before, the conversation doesn't end here. It continues to expand and evolve, and the challenge and challenges us with everything that we think we know. So yeah, if you've actually had an experience or anything like, you know, around the UFO or the UAP phenomena, like please send it in to beyondtheveilaustralia@outlook.com. I'd be really intrigued to hear about it and learn about it, and maybe it's something that we can bring up for discussion or share through our paranormal storytelling. But yeah, I just want to again thank you all so much for listening this far, and I hope that you've been enjoying the content this far. There's plenty more where it came from. So yeah, until next time, keep questioning everything, and remember, sometimes the cover-up is the real story.